Hello again, and welcome back to my studio. In my last video, I mentioned that I wanted to go through the process of creating one of these deeply textural pieces using glazing, which is what I'm going to do. This one I have prepared using some different techniques. You can use a lot of different things when you're creating one of these. When you're creating the base texture, artists can use whatever they want, really. It's just a matter of the limits of your imagination and what you want to do, what you want to achieve. In something like this, part of the fun of it is the experimentation and the exploration. But when you're working with glazing specifically, you need to have some kind of plan. So I have a plan, I have a direction, but with pieces like this, you never really know how it's going to turn out, which is what I find very exciting about it. The first step, when you're working with glazing, the whole idea behind it is that you are laying thin washes of color one on top of the other in a way that they create a desired effect. And learning how to create that effect really is a matter of experimenting. I mean, they say that every artist has stacks and stacks and stacks of, quote unquote failures. But I don't ever see them as failures, because every time you do something, you learn something. And so I'm going to follow the same pattern for this one that I did for the last one for Venus Rising, because I really like the way that those textures and colors came out, and I wanted to play with that idea a little bit more. I don't really know how this is going to turn out per se, which is, really the fun of it, but we'll just stick to the plan and see what happens. So the first thing that I do, of course, you create the base texture, and I use some netting and modeling paste and a little bit of crackle paste, which are things that I really love. And I'll go into that a little bit later, because this first step is pretty basic, and you kind of have to have a lot of patience when you're doing something like this. So what I do for this specific color palette is I start with permanent magenta, and that's that nice beautiful pink, and that's all I'm going to do right now. Is create a base coat. There's a little bit of water in there, and then add a lot of magenta, and then I'm going to add a little bit of this is a glazing medium. It just extends the paint a little bit and makes it a little bit more luminous and transparent, and something that I really like. So, and we're just going to, play with it and fill in kind of all of the little pieces, and start here. And I use different things. I'm going to bring out the brush in a minute to start getting into a lot of these crevices, because I really want this base coat to stick. And I'm going to let this dry overnight. So this is going to be a multi-day process, and you have to work quickly with acrylics. It's just something that I found, because they tend to dry very quickly. And I want it to be nice and thick, and I want it to be fill in everything, because everything that goes on top, you see all of the whites, and I may keep a couple of those. I'm not really sure. We'll play with it and see what happens. So I'm just kind of filling in all of the crevices. And when you have at the beginning like this, when you're doing this, you really have to understand that the monochromatic effect is going to completely disappear once you start adding, textures and glazes and colors on top. So, you know, while it seems like I may be losing a lot of the appearance of everything that's happening by filling in all of these cracks, it's not really true, because when I come back on top with a lot of the other colors that I'm going to be using once this is dry, you will start to see these elements reappear. And this one is pretty loosely transparent. I mean, it's not too opaque. Some of the textures that are going to come, or the colors I'm going to be using later on, are going to be a little opaque to provide a bit of a contrast, but I really love this vibrancy. I love the way, and this is you know, something that I know just from experience, from working with this technique, this color, is that this really shines through. It's a very strong base for everything that comes after it. And I, you know, love to play with different color palettes. You know, this is a very specific palette. You know, at some point, I will probably start playing with maybe more earthy tones, more luminous blue tones. Monochromatic blue is something that I've always been interested in. The gold that I use comes later in the process, and it is pretty opaque. It lays on top really nicely, and it provides a base for a lot of the colors, and it complements so many colors so beautifully. I mean, you know, you have golden red is incredible. Golden turquoise is incredible. You know, it really is kind of a universal complement that you can use in a lot of different ways. So, okay, so I get everything in there. Okay, so you see, fill in all the cracks. Okay, and it's a little bit transparent. And when you have the texture coming through like this, it almost instinctively, you know, creates differences in values, which I really like, just because it collects differently in different places. And that's great. You know, you don't want to, in a piece like this, you don't want anything to be too uniform. I mean, kind of the whole point is to make it interesting. And so any variations, you know, I'm a big believer in happy accidents. I think that they're wonderful when they happen, and it's great when they're good. Sometimes they're bad. And you just, you know, learn and move on. Say, okay, well, we're not going to do that again. But sometimes you see something and it's like, that is amazing. I love that. So anyway, here we go. So this is it. And okay, so I have everything on here. What I'm going to do now, and this is, again, you know, this question of experience. In some of the other ones, I kind of had a problem later on with covering brush strokes, because in a piece like this, I really don't necessarily want to see the brush strokes. So anywhere where I see them, I'm going to use a rag. And this is a, you know, the brush I use sparingly on pieces like this, to be perfectly honest. I mostly use a rag because it really kind of enhances, you know, what you're trying to achieve, which is something that's not, it's more elemental, you know, it's not necessarily painterly per se. You know, you're not really interested in. Okay, so have this kind of mitigate my brush strokes a little bit. Okay, get a little bit of value going in here. And then we are going to let this dry overnight, actually, because I want, the thing about acrylics is that you have to be very careful because everything that we're going to be laying on top, there's going to be a lot of activity. You know, we're going to be rubbing pieces in, we're going to be rubbing pieces off, we're going to be using some water to bring some things through. So I want this base coat to be as stable as possible. I don't want to lose it later on in the process through some of the techniques that we'll be using, which can get kind of rough, you know, when you're dealing with a piece like this. You know, it's a painting. It can take a lot of activity, I guess you could say. You know. Okay, so there we go. There we go. And there we go. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and we're going to let this dry overnight. So I'm going to put that over here.